Hello YouTube, good to have you here with me today. It's going to be something a little different for those of you who have seen my other videos. We're going to be cutting back and forth between myself full screen and the video we're using for context. Today's video is by a doctor, a psychologist, Dr. Orion Taraban. He's going to be speaking about why successful men use female escorts. And we'll let him take it away with the introduction. As always, I'll give my input and interject throughout, but this time, as I've mentioned, I'll be cutting back and forth between Dr. Orion and myself.
I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is Psychacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is why successful men use escorts. This is the first part in a 3-part series on this subject, so you'll need to be patient to hear the whole story. I'm going to begin this talk by explicitly stating this is not an endorsement for prostitution. Personally, I have never hired an escort or a prostitute in my life. And to be honest, when I was younger, I used to be very judgmental with respect to the men who did. In so many words, I thought such men must be losers who, for whatever reason, couldn't otherwise get access to women unless they paid for it. And while I'm sure there are some unattractive or even some revolting men who use prostitutes for this reason, I actually don't believe they constitute the majority of an escort's clients. In fact, I've since radically changed my opinion of these men, in part due to numerous conversations I've had with men who have used escorts, and in part due to my own experiences in the sexual marketplace as I've become more successful. Though I can't say that I endorse the use of escorts, I can certainly understand it. And this talk is specifically addressed to women to help them comprehend the types of problems unique to highly successful men, who are presumably the kind of men they would most like to target for a long-term relationship.
So I don't want to let him get too far ahead here before I interject. I'm going to try and break it up rather smoothly and seamlessly try to transition between us two, but I have to address some of his talking points. Now, for the most part, I generally agree with what he's saying there. I had a similar outlook, especially as I was growing up all throughout my 20s. Men who partook in that sort of sexual, promiscuous behavior, men that would hire escorts, men that would hire essentially what I looked at as straight up prostitutes that were only useful and used for one thing, men that would go to brothels, strip clubs. I frowned upon it personally throughout most of my 20s, and it was something that I never partook in. However, that being said, I had quite a good relationship with some of these men that partook in these sort of behaviors. Men that would visit the brothel, say every fortnight, perhaps partake in activities such as visiting the strip club and getting a lap dance once a week. And at one stage in my life, I even lived with a group of men. We had a share house with 4 of us, and 3 of them, they decided to hire an escort for the evening and stay for quite an exuberant fee. So before I let Dr. Orion continue here, I just wanted to state that I no longer over the years hold the same vain, hard, cold, set in stone approach and opinion as to why a man might hire an escort. I've evolved my way of thinking to understand that an escort, and mind you, we are strictly speaking about escorts here, not sex workers, not porn stars, not OnlyFans, web camera girls, or girls, women that are working in brothels. I'm strictly speaking about escorts. Now, the way that my thinking worked when I was a younger man was that an escort was simply used for one thing and one thing only. It was like the Uber Eats of having sexual intercourse. Hiring a woman to have sexual promiscuous intercourse with, and generally my belief was that men that were doing that were, as Dr. Orion here said, losers, couldn't potentially get it, couldn't pick up women, couldn't understand what they had to do. They had maybe even low worth and low self-esteem, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around the fact that men don't particularly and not necessarily hire women as escorts to fill some kind of a sexual void that might be going on in their life. But before we continue, you might be thinking, wait a minute, hold on, you just said escorts and not sex workers. Well, isn't it one and the same? Well, here is where there might be some heated debates and discussions online and various forums of really trying to establish what is the definition and the difference between, say, a woman who is advertising herself as an escort compared to a sex worker, traditional sex worker, a call-out girl, girl on call, booty call. What might be the difference? So the way I would define it is an escort will not particularly and necessarily have a discussion of sex or some kind of sexual encounter taking place. She is more of a companion that might be used to accompany or fill some sort of a social void or attend a certain, say, social event with the person who is paying for her time. She's being compensated for providing social services as opposed to sexual services or favors. So now we jump back in with Dr. Orion, where he will further expand and unwind his point as to why men of a certain socioeconomic class and value may hire an escort to accompany them.
By understanding how the economics of dating change as a function of success, women can better position themselves to secure the type of men with whom they most want to mate and date, provided they, like me, can move past the reflexive judgment they may carry with respect to the topic under consideration. Let's get to it. The fact of the matter is, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, the higher your normalized sexual marketplace value, the more traditional dating becomes increasingly expensive. In fact, the most attractive women and the most successful men often end up pricing themselves out of the dating market. This is why, for example, it's probably best for a woman to be like an 8.5. If you're an 8.5, you're definitely attractive enough to get plenty of attention and preferential treatment. However, because you're not like a world-class beauty, you actually avoid a lot of the downsides and liabilities associated with being fabulously attractive. These are problems that less attractive women don't even know exist and never have to deal with.
So he's already made some pretty good points, and I have to stop him there to interject. He has mentioned some things that really stand out, and I've even touched on some of these points in my other videos about how women tend to overshoot and self-perceive their value as being significantly higher than what might actually be because of the reception that they get when they put themselves out there. For example, I might have touched on this in my Your Looks Out of 10 video, which I will put in the description or pin it towards the end of this video. I've spoken that a woman can generally look around a 5, maybe even a sub 5. I have tried this myself by using a woman's photos and making a dating profile back in 2017. She can have the free version of a dating app, and it is beyond a shadow of a doubt that a woman will receive attention, even with the limited amount of free swipes that she will, say, receive in a 12-hour period. There will be at least, in my opinion, 4 to 5 matches within that first 100 right swipes that she may do, and she will garner likely 90 to 100% of male attention from those matches acquired. So now you might be thinking, well, why even bring that up? Why is that relevant? Where does that tie in particular with escorts and why men would hire an escort? Well, I bring that up because I just pointed out that a woman can generally create a dating profile. Say you created a dating profile today for the very first time. You put your best foot forward. You put, say, 2 to 3 of your best, your most flattering photos out on a dating profile. You don't even have to write a bio per se. Just put in some parameters such as your height, maybe your activity level, and voila, I can almost guarantee with utmost certainty you will be engaging in at least multiple conversations before the end of that day. That being said, it's more than likely that you will be at least able to schedule a meeting or perhaps a hookup, if that was your intention, within that same day for, say, later that evening or later in the week, a day or two later. Whereas for a man, it is totally different. You can even be in the top 5 to 1%. It does not guarantee with certainty that you will acquire those kind of matches simply because of the number of men to women, the ratio to men and women on those apps. But I'll also link some studies in the description that statistically only around 4.5 to 5% of women swipe right. 95% of men get declined and get swiped left. This is for dating apps such as Bumble, Hinge, Tinder. Whereas men have a staggering, in contrast comparison, 62% likely to swipe right on every single profile. So I really needed to get that out of the way for contextual sake, to really now be able to make my point and argument as to why a man might choose to bypass the whole game, we'll call it, of trying to find a relationship, find a woman over, say, the modern day landscape of using dating apps. Well, simply because time is a finite resource. Again, in this video, we are partially talking about the middle to higher class, the higher tier men that might not have the time to play those sort of games. They might simply want a woman for their time, their company, to, say, accompany them to some kind of an event. They might want to have that woman there to share some kind of a social experience with. Whereas if you look at modern dating and dating apps, and the reason I brought them up is that generally speaking, even for a higher class, a level above kind of man, okay, a top tier man, we'll call him that, a top tier man will still have to play the game, generally speaking. He will still have to go to the effort, go to the extent of creating a dating profile. He will have to sit there, try and upload his best pictures, write some kind of an elaborate bio. Again, he will be judged perhaps for his height and for his income, where he might have went to high school and college, and he will then have to engage with those few matches. Again, statistically proven, he will get fewer matches than your sub 5 women, generally because, again, less women are on these dating apps compared to men, and only about 5% of men get swiped on. He will then play this game, this dating game of trying to establish, communicate with this woman, schedule a time to meet. He will probably have to talk maybe for a day or 2 or 3, and the amount of hours that he might invest throughout the coming days just to line up this scheduled meeting, event, whatever it may be. She might want to get to know him in, say, a public place, and he can't just straight up take her to a social function or some kind of an event that he might want her company in.
They might roll their eyes at this suite of problems and say, oh, poor baby, can't handle being beautiful. I wish I had her problems. But frankly, that's really an envy reaction. The problems of really beautiful women are real problems. They're not problems of survival, but if we're honest, neither are the problems that their haters are contending with. Beautiful women receive little to no sympathy for their difficulties, not because their difficulties aren't real, but because there are so few other people who have experienced them. The same thing holds true for men. The sweet spot for being a man is probably earning high 6, low 7 figures a year. That is more than enough to provide a comfortable and enjoyable lifestyle for yourself and your family. Anything more than that, and men start to deal with a suite of problems that less successful men don't even know exist and never have to deal with. And if anyone garners more unearned hatred than the beautiful, it's the wealthy. People scoff at the champagne problems of the rich, but the problems of really successful men are real problems. And these men experience even less sympathy for their difficulties than beautiful women do, not because their difficulties aren't real, but because there are so few other people who have experienced them. Now, you might think that being a highly successful man would be a wonderful liability in the sexual marketplace, and you would be correct. After all, if a man has wealth and status and fame, he typically enjoys very good optionality with women. So why would a man like this use escorts? It isn't as though there is a dearth of women who would be interested in dating him. Is it really true that all these men are just immature narcissists who delight in the objectification of women? Or might there be another explanation for this not uncommon behavior among this particular demographic? But before I answer these questions, if you're liking what you're hearing, please consider sending this episode to someone who might benefit from its message, because it's word of mouth referrals like this that really help to make the channel grow. You can also hit the thanks button and tip me in proportion to the value you feel you've derived from this episode. I'm proud to announce that my book, The Value of Others, is now available for pre-sale on Amazon. It'll be released in just a few days. So take action now to get your hands on it. I'm also writing original content for my free weekly newsletter. If you'd like to sign up, you can do so on my website. Finally, please fill out an inquiry form on my website if you're interested in booking a paid consultation. The links to everything I just talked about are in the description below. So check them out.
You gotta love the plugins of the successful and bigger YouTube channels. We always got to interject somewhere along the way.
All right, let's get back to it. The reason why so many of these top-tier men use prostitutes is because...
We'll let him answer, but I just want to bring this video back down to earth a little bit for the middle class, everyday, every man's average blue-collar worker perhaps. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get anything out of this if he now starts talking about why the upper tier, the higher echelon, the 6+ figure man would hire an escort. I will give some interjecting examples and perhaps common uses of an escort for someone on, say, an average income.
It becomes prohibitively expensive to date traditionally once you cross a certain point. Let's examine why this might be the case.
Thank you very much. This does tie in with what I was saying. What is it actually costing you in the long run? What is it costing you beyond just necessarily looking at the dollar cost value of this, say, date, this experience? I'm not just talking about, say, the Uber that you might have had to pay for yourself, for her to meet in this mutual location, perhaps the time you have to take out of your evening, out of your date to meet up with her, the time that you've already invested in creating this dating profile, of having these pictures perhaps even taken in the first place to upload on your dating profile, the game that you have had to play, perhaps engage in numerous hours, days worth of conversation just to get this woman comfortable to now meet you in a public place. And again, when you arrive, there's perhaps this expectation that you might have to pay for the dinner, pay for the evening, and there is now more resources that you've put into this, and this is all pretty much happening from the very first moment of you potentially interacting with this person. Now, I'm not here trying to say that don't ever traditionally date. Hey, escorts is the way. Let's all start escort maxing to perhaps fill some kind of a social void in our lives. No, gentlemen, that's not what I'm getting at here at all. It's totally normal to go on dates with women. It's okay to court women. But what we're talking about here is why a man might choose to bypass that traditional route. He might simply not be interested in having some kind of a social void filled by a woman via traditional means because of the amount of time, i.e. resources, it costs him in the long run. The amount of hours and days he might have to play the game. He might simply want a woman's affection. However that might sound to you, there are men that simply want companionship, someone to, say, spend an evening with, to go to a nice place to have dinner with. They understand that they are paying for it, but that simply fills a need, and the woman, the escort, the companion, provides the service that the man is looking for. They understand that it is a business transaction, it's a transaction-based interaction, and they are happy with that, and they don't want to pursue something with potential strings being attached.
One of my good friends is a corporate lawyer, and he bills his time at $1,300 an hour. Now, that may sound like a lot, but it's kind of the going rate for a partner at a top-tier law firm. By the same token, there are folks in my space online who charge $2,000 to $3,000 an hour for a consultation. And then you get into the rarefied realm of bank presidents, celebrities, tycoons, and professional athletes who can easily command tens of thousands of dollars or more for an hour of their time. However, to make this talk more accessible, let's just use the lawyer's rate as the standard of measurement. So let's assume a man is making $1,300 an hour, like my friend. In the traditional dating pipeline, what would be expected of him? Well, first, he'd have to spend some time making something happen. Maybe he has to go out to a bar on a Saturday night and rizz up a girl. And this is hardly a sure thing, even at the local meat market, so he'll have to have the energy and the emotional resilience to deal with the rejection that inevitably stands between him and an actual prospect. Or he'll have to spend time creating a dating profile on an app that won't land him in the invisible 90% functionally ignored by all women. and swiping on hundreds of accounts in order to get some matches. Either way, once he succeeds in getting a number, he'll need to spend more time playing the text game in order to help the woman feel sufficiently safe and sufficiently attracted, which is not an easy balance to strike, to meet up for an actual date. Of course, he'll be expected to plan the date, which will almost certainly occur at some neutral location, as opposed to his house, several days or even weeks out. On the date, he'll be expected to cover all the expenses, but as we'll see, this is the most inexpensive part of dating for him. The meeting itself will probably last 2, maybe 3 hours, with potentially an hour of commuting to and from the location. So he likely has to block off an entire evening, and busy, successful men may only get one evening off a week, if that. And given all this time and effort and expense, there is, of course, absolutely no guarantee that the man will even be attracted to the woman in question, let alone succeed in securing a sexual encounter.
I like how he seamlessly made his own points, and yet there was a way where we found middle ground where we reassured and reaffirmed each other's individual points as well being made. And again, I'll bring this back to the middle class, the average man, and where they might seek out an escort, where, say, the instance that I touched on at the start of this video, where I had an experience, I should say, of housemates who hired an escort for the evening. Now, without getting vile and into crude-like details, the point is that the escort stayed for the entirety of the evening, and 2 of them didn't sleep with the escort. There was no promiscuous sexual activity with the escort, yet they still spent time with her. Yes, as some men tend to do, they share and perhaps overshare. One of them did use the escort for a sexual encounter, but it was agreed upon prior to the meeting. It was established, the framework was established, and apparently, as I was being told by one of these men, that it was pre-planned that the escort, while she may entertain and accompany 3 men, she was only going to have or provide sexual services to one of them, the one that she made the initial agreement with. Now, again, she stayed most of the evening in this place, in this share house, and the man divulged the information that the sexual encounter really only took place for about 15 to 20 minutes of the entirety of the night that the escort was hired for. So she ended up staying, and again, I mentioned an exuberant amount, some cost fallacy. She was paid around $3,500 to stay for the evening, which only had the one sexual encounter, and she stayed for approximate total of about 6.5 hours that evening. Now, whilst again I didn't partake and I didn't observe, I only have the hearsay stories of what took place that night. For the most part, I was told that it was a rather social interaction. So whilst the initial man that did hire her services, he actually divulged information to me that he enjoyed her company. She gave him a massage. They were having conversations, and perhaps, and this is a bit of a cliche, you see it in movies sometimes, where the woman, an attractive woman, will say, hey, just give me some time with this man and he'll share all of his deepest and darkest secrets. He'll give away the nuclear launch codes. And some men will do that. They will simply say through that sexual interaction, they'll feel at ease. They'll feel like this connection that might not necessarily exist, but they'll find themselves entrenched in this kind of fantasy where now this is filling some kind of a nurturing social void, some kind of love that might be lacking, an experience that they've been missing in their lives, and now the escort is covering those boxes. She's helping them, she's mending them, and they feel at ease and comfortable with her. And men will simply want that companionship. It just really boils down to that root need and innate desire to be felt like that you're heard, that you're being appreciated, that you're being valued. And even though it might be an act, men can be really receptive to that kind of behavior where they feel that, okay, I'm being respected here, I'm being valued, I'm the boss, I'm not hearing any bitching, any kind of complaints, any kind of negative connotations and bad feedback where she's not in the mood and her head hurts. And hey, ladies, that's okay if you're in a bad mood. It's that time of the month, your head hurts, it's okay. But the man has simply hired this escort to fill this need, this desire that he might have, and she is doing that particular job and providing that particular service that she was hired to do, with none of the negative connotations, none of those extra resources that the man might have to expand day to day just to sustain and keep a woman happy in a natural monogamous relationship.
And irrespective of the moral or ethics involved, this is frustrating because since men attempt to exchange resources for sexual opportunity in the sexual marketplace, this is why he's there. So even if we ignore all the monetary expenses associated with the date itself, which are potentially not insignificant, a 3-hour date bookended by an hour of travel at $1,300 an hour is $5,200. This means this guy is paying $5,000 in terms of the cost to his time to go on a date with you. And this does not include any of the time and effort that went into securing the date. This may come as a shock, but most women do not just show up into a man's life with an intention to make his life easier. For most men, it's a lot of fucking work to get sex and relationships from women. You hear a lot about the emotional labor that women perform for men. But it's absolutely true that men perform a great deal of emotional labor for women. It's just that the man's labor typically has to do with getting laid and securing and maintaining the relationship. To do this, men often have to be charming or funny or cool. They have to stimulate your emotions and arouse your attraction. They have to listen to you talk about your day and care about the woman inside your body. And they have to do all this without giving the slightest impression that this is in any way work for them, or that they could possibly want to do literally anything else with their time and attention. Because if you get the impression that they're just doing this because it works and not because they authentically want to do it, you won't fuck them. This is not easy to do. Even the most successful Casanovas strike out more often than they get on base. Women are extremely complex, and most men do not even begin to approach an understanding of how you operate. In any case, dating you requires a lot of time, energy, money, and emotional resilience. And if you're working 80 hours a week, you just might not have the bandwidth for that.
So I think the doctor's going to go into his concluding points for this video, so I'll use this opportunity to interject and conclude with my own. Again, I bring this video back to not necessarily and not particularly to the men of the higher socioeconomic class, but also pertains to the men of the middle class, the middle level average income, we'll call it. These men, and why they might hire an escort, is simply because, as the doctor here has also elaborated, they may simply have their mental bandwidth exhausted. Resources don't necessarily mean dollars. Men use resources in ways such as giving the woman time, giving their emotional capabilities, emotional lending, emotional support to sustain, to develop, to allow the relationship to flourish. And over time, over years, that can become extremely draining. I understand here what the doctor is saying, that men have this innate expectation a lot of the time by women to be bulletproof, to always be there, to uphold these values of being available and emotionally available, as women might call it, and always supportive, always grounded, being the solid foundation. Now, while for the most part they might be correct, men can expand and use up all their mental bandwidth and then leave themselves in this place where they are completely exhausted. They've used all their mental faculty resources that are available to them, and that's when they can find themselves in a low depressive state kind of mood. You just have to take a simple look at men that go through devastating breakups, significantly difficult divorces, and how if children are involved, that might leave them crushed. That might leave them crushed for numerous weeks or even years, something that might even take a lifetime to recover from. Because a man knows when he's put his best foot forward, he truly believes that he has done his very best, and he wasn't. He then evaluates, he looks back and he thinks, wow, in that entire relationship, I really did the best that I could, and I gave my all in that moment, and it still wasn't enough. She's still left with the kids. She's still left with the house. She still left me here broken and devastated. And that can happen to men. This expectation that a man simply walks away and he's left unscathed, a lot of the time is not true. So where an escort then comes into all of this is that when a man wants someone to be there for him, wants to be heard, wants to be respected, wants to be treated with respect, dignity, love, cared for, have a woman stand there by his side. Say he's at a social event and she backs what he's saying. She's there with him and supporting him. Even though she doesn't particularly agree, she is providing this service that fills this void, this need, maybe even requirement that the man has for that evening to, say, use to restore his social battery, to then have that kind of an experience with a woman that may or may not pertain sexual encounters, where he then uses this engagement with the woman to allow himself to recharge, refocus, re-sentimentally, and again, fill this social need that he may have had.
Dating just feels like another job, but a job that you pay to work. I understand that women have their own frustrations with the dating process, but that's not why we're here today. We're looking at dating from the perspective of successful men in these episodes. We'll get back to you later. So that's the end of part 1. What do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I appreciate your support, and thank you for listening.